Hello everyone, it's Seth, probably better known as Saffron Olive, back here again for another Shadows over Innistrad set review with Chaz. How you doing, Chaz?
How's it going? I'm doing okay. Grab your investigative cloaks. We're going in.
We are going into some more Shadows over Innistrad. Today, it is time for some black cards. So let's talk about a card that some people have called the worst mythic ever printed. Not me, mind you, but some people. Behold the Beyond. It is a 7 mana spell, triple tutor, but you have to Lion's Eye Diamond away your hand if you want to cast it. Any way this sees play anywhere, Chaz.
Well, Tomer is going to be having an EDH video about Shadows over Innistrad. I will defer to Tomer and his EDH expertise, but I think it's okay in that setting, right? I mean, you discard your hand, that's always a bummer, but for 7 mana you get 3 cards, which is okay. But I don't know, in standard or modern or anything like that, it's going to be pretty tough to justify Behold the Beyond.
Yeah, discarding your hand is definitely a bummer. I agree with that. The problem for me is there's a card called Diabolic Revelation, which was a rare printed in a core set that was 5 and X, and you search your library for X cards, and you don't discard your hand, so you don't have the bummer aspect of it. So it just feels so bad compared to that. I guess that maybe the idea is this is like you get to discard all your Giralf's masterpieces, and so I don't know. I think this card is pretty horrible for standard and modern and limited and any other format you can think of.
Yeah, if this is the worst mythic, I'm okay with that.
Well,
It's really not too terrible, but I do understand the angst people have against this card.
Well, and I don't think it's the worst mythic. We get to talk about that one tomorrow when we get to to the red section of our set review. There'll be a nice rant about that. So anyway, let's turn to a card which I think is a little better than Behold the Beyond, at least. It is in a dual deck, so it's a dual deck mythic, Mindwrack Demon. So what do you think about Mindwrack Demon, Chaz?
I love Mindwrack Demon, actually. I think people look at this, it doesn't really do a whole lot. It's not really like a mythic that people are going to be impressed with, because it just doesn't really do anything. But milling 4 cards, getting set up for Delirium, I mean, it's a good power and toughness, relative to its casting cost. It has evasion, it has trample, can't be chump blocked. But the thing about the Delirium on this card that I don't really like is 4 life isn't a big deal, but just with Delirium in general, like, this is just so you don't get the negative rather than having a positive. So at the end of the day, you're really just getting a 4 mana 4/5 with flying and trample, which is still great. But having the Delirium just so there's not a drawback doesn't really add a whole lot of hype to this card.
That's a good point. Most of the Delirium cards get better when you have Delirium activated. This one just makes itself slightly less painful. So I still think, though, it's probably playable, especially if there's a deck that really values the Satyr Wayfinder type, put the top 4 cards of your library into your graveyard trigger. That could be relevant in some decks. There are a lot of graveyard synergies in cards that kind of want to be in your graveyard. So if some deck can abuse that, it's a reasonable body. I mean, 4/5 flying trample for 4 mana is above the curve, even by modern standards. So I think it's got a chance. I don't think it's broken. Its ceiling is being a really good, efficient beater. So it's not going to be the kind of card that just breaks the format or anything. But I think it can show up and see play in standard.
Yeah, for sure. It is a solid card. The only thing is, it's just when you look back, you see cards like Abyssal Persecutor. You see cards even more recent than that in Desecration Demon. That was just so much better for 4 mana. It's not even a comparison. So I was a little disappointed in that.
Anyway, now a mythic that I don't think anyone has said anything bad about, other than why did they print this card? It is too crazy. Relentless Dead, the little mythic that has more text on it than any other card in the set, I believe. It does a little bit of everything. So what do you think, Chaz? Where does Relentless Dead fit?
It fits in a lot of places. Much like Olivia mobilized for war, this isn't really delegated to a zombie deck. It just gives you a lot of reach on its own. I mean, if you don't even play any other zombies, that's fine. I mean, Relentless Dead is a recurring threat. It enables some other interesting cards, sacrifice cards that you can just pay an extra black and get Relentless Dead back into your hand to conceivably continue to extract value out of these sacrifice outlets. But yeah, there's nothing bad to say about Relentless Dead because there's nothing bad about it.
Yeah, I agree. This card is pure upside. I mean, a 2/2 menace for 2 is already not bad. Then it can't die, essentially, if you leave mana up, which obviously isn't bad. And then you can just randomly reanimate other zombies. Like, all around, the card is pure upside. Like you said, it doesn't need to be in Zombie Tribal, because a 2/2 menace for 2 that keeps putting itself back to your hand for only 1 mana when it dies is already a pretty absurd card. So even if you never reanimate another zombie, it's still good. And with 4 Relentless Deads, you can just reanimate your other Relentless Deads if one ever gets to the graveyard because you couldn't leave that black mana up to return it to your hand when it died. So just the 4 of those seems like the basis for a very strong deck, in Standard and maybe even Modern.
Well, they don't call them the endless ranks of the dead for nothing. So if anyone, this is a harken back to that card in the first Innistrad. You can see obviously the window pane is broken, and here we are, the Relentless Dead. So, and it has our favorite keyword. So how can this possibly go wrong?
Yeah, I mean, it does have Menace, and we all know that Menace is the best keyword ever created. So
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a can't lose situation with Relentless Dead, and the flavor is sweet. I do love how it harkens back to Endless Ranks of the Dead, but the zombies have broken through the stained glass window, which actually makes me wonder why they were kept out by a stained glass window to begin with. But hey,
Because reasons.
yeah,
So.
there are reasons. All right, that's enough of the mythics from Black. Let's talk about rares. First off, a vampire wizard, Asylum Visitor. So it's kind of a weird pseudo like dark confidant slash what was that horrible card from a couple sets ago where you drew if you had an empty hand?
Blood Scrivener?
Blood Scrivener. I believe it
Yeah.
was Blood Scrivener. So it's similar to those cards. What do you think, Chaz? Is it playable?
Well, we've seen a lot of Dark Confidant-esque, imitations over the course of Magic history, but this honestly isn't bad at all. It's competitively costed. You can madness it, so it helps with time. The timing of its ability. Maybe it's the last card in your hand. You get to madness it. It goes right along with all the aggressive vampires that we've seen in Shadows over Innistrad. We talked about that when we mentioned Olivia. I really do love Asylum Visitor, actually.
And the big upside to this card that those other cards didn't have is it triggers on each upkeep. So you can potentially draw 2 cards a turn if you are empty-handed, and you can keep your opponent empty-handed, like in a top deck war. So you put your opponent in a position where they're going to have to either hold cards in hand, which might not be the biggest deal. They can hold a land or something, but there is additional upside there where you can potentially draw more cards per turn than you would with a typical Dark Confidant variant.
Yeah, and so this is interesting, and it might slip into one of those 8-rack type decks where you're trying to keep your opponent at 0 mana, and in the meantime, you're drawing cards based on them having no hand.
Yeah, that seems like a possibility, because then in those type of decks, you really would be drawing 2 cards per turn rather consistently, so that could work.
Yeah, so Asylum Visitor is a very good rare. Hasn't gotten as much praise as I thought it would be, but it's certainly by no means bad. It's a solid rare.
It is. We haven't talked about many Madness cards yet. One of the weirdest things about Madness for me in Shadows over Innistrad is it is very often costed the same as the card's actual mana cost.
Yeah, that is interesting, and it does happen a lot in Shadows over Innistrad, but giving it madness, even if it is the same mana cost, just it widens the timing of playing these cards. So I'm actually kind of okay with it being 2 because then you get to play it essentially as an instant.
Yes, and plus we've talked about like Olivia, and there's some other cards as well that want you to be discarding cards. So this you get to discard for free essentially instead of just casting it. You can discard it and then cast it for the same mana. So I don't think it's a bad thing that it's costed the same. It just struck me as odd because in older sets with Madness, it wasn't really like that. A lot of times the Madness cost was cheaper than the actual converted mana cost.
Yeah, well, I think they tried to keep the number of Basking Root Walla type cards to a minimum, so makes sense.
Which was probably a very good idea from a design perspective. I do not want Basking Root Walla in Standard.
I don't think anybody does.
All right, so we have a sweet one next. I have to say, zombies have gotten some serious love in Shadows over Innistrad, because this is another pretty absurd zombie. It's sort of oddly a zombie giant, even though it's a 3-mana 2/2, but it seems like it has a lot of power. What do you think, Chaz? Diregraf Colossus.
So I thought this card was 4 mana, and for the longest time, I don't know why, but this seems a lot better at 3 mana, and could be potentially really huge for a kind of low investment. I like the fact that it gives you more zombies when you cast zombies. It definitely fits into the flavor of it being a huge zombie like Colossus. So I really like Diregraf Colossus.
Yeah, it just seems to have so much synergy with other cards in the set. Like, zombies already want zombies in the graveyard. That's kind of what the whole theme is, to get them in the graveyard and get them back out. So, potentially in the late game, this is going to be a 5/5 or a 7/7 or something even more ridiculous for only 3 mana. And then it's kind of the army in the can, too, because every time you cast a zombie, you get the creature token. So with something like Relentless Dead, if you can sack that and just keep casting it, you can grow a huge board from just those 2 cards.
Yeah, we talked about humans being a tribe to look out for in Modern. Diregraf Colossus is a really great card to enable a zombie archetype. I don't know if it's going to be purely zombies or some dredge type deck in Modern, but the thought of playing Relentless Deads and Grave Crawlers and getting a bunch of 2/2 zombies is really frightening.
Yeah, Gravecrawler seems absurd with this card. Like, that seems like so much value. 1 mana, make 4 power worth of zombies across 2 bodies, and then do it again. I don't know. I don't know how you can beat that. That is a combo, 2-card combo, without much work at all, just for playing like zombie tribal. It's not like you're jamming janky bad cards in your deck to make that work. So
Right, and suddenly all these Grave Crawlers and Relentless Deads are just an extra point power and toughness bigger when they come back into play, at least the first time.
yeah, so it is it seems like an absurd card, and I think you're right. Could be another push towards zombies being Modern playable, which I think would be sweet. I think it would be cool to have a zombie deck in Modern. Up next, oh no, this card. I know Chaz loves this one, so why don't you talk about Elusive Tormentor, Chaz?
I do love this card, and I'm actually surprised you don't love it, because this is the closest thing we're getting to Invisible Stalker probably ever again. But I really like it. I don't know why. I guess I'm the only one, because I've never heard anyone else say they liked it. But you look at Elusive Tormentor. It's a 4-mana 4/4, which isn't terrible by any means. It's fairly valued, a good power and toughness for that cost. And just for a discard, you just get to flip it. For one generic and a discard, you get to flip it. And you get Insidious Mist, which is a evasive creature. And I was just loving the fact that maybe somehow you get to power up the Insidious Mist. And a hexproof indestructible creature is insanely hard to get rid of. And with a card like Runechanter's Pike or something like that, you can just slap on into Insidious Mist and continue to attack for the rest of the game. So we don't have Runechanter's Pike yet in Standard, but I'm hoping for a couple of viable equipments or enchantments that we can throw onto Insidious Mist and Voltron, our way to victory.
I have to say, I do like the Insidious Mist side. That side is pretty sweet, and Hexproof and Indestructible is almost impossible to ever get rid of. You're right. It's not as bad as I'm making it out to be. It seems like a lot of work to actually get the Insidious Miss, and it's a little disappointing that Insidious Miss, why it can't be blocked. It has 0 power, so you can't really deal damage with it without help. So I don't know. I have a hard time seeing where it really fits in Standard, just because it's so odd. But maybe there's a deck that just wants to flip it into Insidious Mist and go to town with a essentially unkillable, unblockable 0/1. So you never know. It could happen.
Yeah, it could happen. It does play well, at least, both sides of the card. You can attack, flip it back into Elusive Tormentor. But really where I was more interested in is just sticking with the Insidious Mist and trying to build it up so you create a really quick clock.
And for me, my mind always goes to Worship. If you flip an Insidious Mist and get a Worship on the battlefield, it's going to be really hard to die because you're always going to have that creature there for Worship to take its effect. So there might be some weird combo. I actually did a search when I was building a Worship deck for the words Hexproof and Indestructible. And outside of Fleecemane Lion, which you need to Monstrous for 5 mana, I could not find any. So it is a really unique set of abilities to have Hexproof and Indestructible. So I guess just that makes it somewhat exciting. Alright, now we get some Reanimation. Ever After. So 6 mana, you get 2 creatures back from your graveyard. They're zombies, and then you put it on the bottom of your library, which is a weird cycle or partial cycle. What is this putting it on the bottom of your library thing, Chaz? What's the flavor purpose of that?
I don't really know, actually. And you're right, it's like a partial cycle. It's on a couple of cards, but maybe it's just so, I don't know. I couldn't really tell you why the flavor part of that going back, to your library. I guess Ever After, so it gets to keep happening forever.
Okay. So, I'll buy that. Because I couldn't think of any reason either. I just thought, that's weird that it goes on the bottom of your library.
Yeah, but 6 mana for 2 cards isn't bad, and it's probably as close as we'll ever get to the card in Innistrad.
Unburial Rites?
Yeah, Unburial Rites. So it's not as strong as Unburial Rites on the surface, but it does do Unburial Rites in 1 shot. So that is interesting.
Yeah, I think with Standard, the big issue is we haven't, since Solar Flare, I guess, in the original Innistrad, have had a competitive reanimation deck. So I'm not sure that Ever After is the card that changes that. I don't know if we have the right reanimation targets, especially since we mentioned a couple days ago, a lot of the biggest things have when cast triggered abilities, so you don't get the full power when you reanimate them. But it's cool.
Yeah, like you said, as far as constructed goes, I don't know if it fits in anywhere, but it does do a lot for 6 mana. 2 creatures is a good number to get for that type of cost.
Yeah, I mean, that is a lot of value, so I'll buy that. I'm not sure it fits, but you never know. It is enough value that there could be a deck out there that wanted it. A card I am probably unreasonably excited about, From Under the Floorboards. So a sorcery, make some zombie tokens. What do you think, Chaz? I know what I think. I want to hear someone else's opinion on this card.
I love this card. I really love this card. I think it's one of the better Madness cards in the set, if not the best. The Madness part of this card really makes it devastating, considering even if you just pay for the mana that you get to, if you pay what the cost would have been 5, you still get the same amount of value out of it, and if you somehow get more into it, all the more the merrier in terms of zombie creature tokens. And From Under the Floorboards at end of turn with that Madness just seems insanely good. You get some life, you get a bunch of, or if for the Madness sake, you get X life and more zombie creature tokens. So there's really not a lot of downside to playing this card. Even for 5, it's still pretty good. And if you get to extract more out of the Madness, then by all means, and you get to play it as an instant.
Yeah, for me, this card, and it might be a stretch, but this is, for me, the Black Sphinx's Revelation. I mean, you pitch this to Jace at the end of turn in some sort of control deck. You make White Sun Zenith amount of 2/2 tokens, which, since you're doing it at the end of your opponent's turn, are going to be able to untap on your turn. And then you also gain X life, just like Sphinx's Revelation. I think this could be a really powerful, like, Jace control deck finisher, just because that is a ton of value. The life gain is relevant, and I think this card is very good.
Yeah, if I had to tag a sleeper, quote unquote, tag to any one of these cards, it's definitely from under the floorboards.
All right, speaking of cards that will not be standard staples in any deck, I think this is the black intro pack rare, Markov Dreadknight. So, any hope here, Chaz?
I actually think it's the best intro pack rare, so I guess that has it going for it. But yeah, in standard or constructed sense, it's kind of uninspiring. It's not really that great, but it does get pretty big pretty quickly if you just keep discarding cards. You get 2 counters for 1 card. It has flying, so it is a vampire, so maybe that has something going for it. It's not all terrible.
Yeah, I think it's a little disappointing that it's so weak before you discard. Like, a 3/3 flyer for 5 is like a common and limited that you like are okay sometimes with playing, but like a 3/3 flyer for 5 isn't constructed playable, and the discard costs so much mana that it's harder to abuse with Madness when we have a lot of free discard outlets like Olivia in Jace, or 1-cost mana outlets, even like Elusive Tormentor, like that card. Like, there's a lot of cheaper ways to discard cards if you want to trigger Madness and cast your from under the floorboards or whatever. And then up next we have To the Slaughter. So a Edict effect makes a player sacrifice a creature planeswalker and then another Delirium card. You can make them sacrifice both. So how does this line up with the other rare removal spells? We've talked about how there's so many rare removal spells. Where does this fit with Anguish Unmaking and some of the other rare removal in the set?
I think it ranks somewhere comparatively to the other ones. Poor little Gossamer, he's going to get dragged away by a huge demon. The flavor is amazing on the card, the naming, just the art, just everything. But if there's a situation where you need a creature and a planeswalker dead, To the Slaughter is where you want to be. I don't know how many times that instance is going to come up, because 3 for just a creature or planeswalker isn't amazing. It is instant, but the Delirium makes it a lot better.
Yeah, I agree with you, and I think this one for me is super dependent on what the format looks like. If everyone's going wide with little creatures, this is essentially unplayable as a 3-mana Edict, but if you're playing control decks where you're going to hit a 5-mana or 6-mana Planeswalker with this, it's pretty insane. So I think a lot of it depends on the specific matchup and how the new format in Standard actually shakes out. So high variance, I guess, is my initial take on this card, that we just don't know yet where it's going to fit, and if it's going to be unplayable or if it's going to be a staple removal spell.
Right. To piggyback, it does depend a lot on that. It is high variance, and it also depends on how fast Delirium can be achieved, right? Because the longer you go, if somehow there's a lot of creatures on the board, it does get worse. You really want the timing of this to be if they have a couple creatures, you nail one of the creatures, they're only planeswalker. That's like the best timing, ideally. So, again, I don't know how many times that instance is going to come up, but I just wanted to kind of add on to everything you said, Seth.
Yep. So, I mean, I think we both agree that it has potential, at least, to see play in Standard, and we just don't know yet how good it'll end up being. So next, oh man, this is the card that I got the most tweets about when it was spoiled. Also the card I am most likely to butcher the name of, Triskaidekaphobia. I think I might be somewhat close with that pronunciation. So this is the most obvious against the odds card in the set. 4-mana enchantment. At the beginning of your upkeep, choose 1. Each player with exactly 13 life loses the game, and then each player gains 1 life. And then option 2 is each player with exactly 13 life loses the game, then each player loses 1 life. So this card obviously isn't playable in the real world, but it is extremely flavorful, and I am going to try my hardest to win with it in the very first Against the Odds episode after Shadows is legal. So,
Well, I think we're all waiting for that one. I was going to say this is against the odd card if there ever was one. Again, extremely flavorful. There's a bunch of 13, little things that you can extract from this card. They're on the internet. You can go see, but like 13 logs in the fire and 13 little stones on the floor. So just really cool design. But yeah, it's unplayable in any real world setting, and it just gets me that like you gain one life or lose one life, on either of these modes of this card. Like, yeah, they lose and you gain one life. All right, cool. But yeah, extremely cool. I have to give it that. Yeah.
Yeah, another example of the flavor home run that is Shadows of Innistrad from start to finish, from mythics through commons. Like, they hit it out of the ballpark with the flavor. Just so good.
Exactly. Like, normally we would hate this card, but it's so cool you can't. You cannot hate this card.
Well, you would hate this card. I would spend hours building a deck around it to make videos of.
Fair enough.
All right, so that actually brings us to the end of the black section of our Shadows over Innistrad set review. So, Chaz, final thoughts on the black cards.
I think black is really strong in Shadows over Innistrad. They're, outside of the rares and mythics, we don't get to talk about some of the commons and even uncommons in black, but black is really strong. Obviously, you have Relentless Dead, one of the better, if not, again, tied for the best mythic in the set. Some solid rares. So overall, I really think black is strong.
Yeah, I agree. Black is strong at the upper rarities from top to bottom. Relentless Dead is my pick for the best mythic in the set, and the other zombies are pretty absurd as well. So I think yesterday we said blue was near the bottom if you were ranking the colors in Shadows. I think black is probably near the top. Definitely, for me, at the top out of the three colors we've talked about so far, black, blue, and white. So,
yeah, I agree. For me, Relentless Dead is my favorite mythic and or rare as well. Sorry to be conforming and not having another backup alternative, but I mean, you just can't deny the power level of that card.
Yeah, and if I had to pick the most powerful black card from the set, I would also go with Relentless Dead. Might be the most powerful card in the whole set, but if I was going to pick my favorite one, it's got to be Triskaidekaphobia. Like that,
of course.
That is the Seth card. I'm sure as soon as you saw we were reviewing black cards, you probably knew I would pick that as my favorite, and I did. That is definitely the card for me.
Yeah. Strong second is from under the floorboards. So just can't say enough good things about that card.
I agree. I think that card is, if I had to pick a sleeper from the set, as you mentioned when we were talking about the card, that might be the best sleeper pick out of the whole set, because I haven't heard anyone talking about it, and I think it is very strong.
Yeah, agreed.
All right, well, that was our black review. We are about halfway through our review of Shadows over Innistrad, so make sure to come back tomorrow, and we will be breaking down all the red rares and mythics, and you're not going to want to miss that one, because red has one mythic in specific that I'm really excited to talk about in a bad way, so make sure to tune in for that one.
Absolutely, we're both really excited, so stay tuned. Yeah, it's been a fun journey so far, and it's just gonna keep on rolling.
All right, thanks for listening, everyone. We'll talk to you tomorrow.